Luke 19. Well, the story of Zacchaeus works for children, but it also works for adults who are trying to follow the biblical story. We meet Jesus as he's walking toward Jerusalem the last week of his life, and he comes through Jericho, traditionally known as the oldest city in the world, and there he meets a man named Zacchaeus, who's sitting on a tree branch. Well, what's going on behind the story? Let's talk about that. This is a quotation from Josephus. Ours is a maritime country, that is Israel. Neither commerce nor the intercourse which it promotes with the outside world has any attraction for us. Our cities are built inland, remote from the sea, and we devote ourselves to the cultivation of the productive country with which we are blessed. The point is, Israel was a very agrarian society, and because of that, Rome had an interesting relationship to them as a country, not again as a maritime country, one that lived by the sea, but one that lived inland. When it came to the society of Israel, general consensus believes that we had four groups of individuals. The elite would be imperial or municipal government officials usually, and then you'd have what you could call a surplus level, which would be a kind of upper middle class. This would be made of merchants, traders, artisans, those who lived above the level of worrying about day-to-day finances. But then you have this larger class called the subsistence level, where, as the word sounds, they're basically living from day to day. This would be the small farmer, the shopkeeper, the tavern owner, things like that. We suspect that this accounted for about 70% of society, 5% and 25%. By the way, the poor would be the ill, the unattached widow, the orphan, anyone who could not fend for themselves. So about 70% of the populace would be liable to really pay for their part in the Roman government. Well, when it came to how to spend your money outside of daily living, these are the kinds of things, some voluntary and some mandatory, that were exacted out of people. The tithe is coming out of the Old Testament idea. Remember, Jesus even chides the Pharisees for tithing of their mint and cumin, so that was still going on. Tribute was what was expected to be given to foreign powers. In this case, it would be Rome. Taxes would be more of the municipal monies that were gathered, again, by Rome in areas around Palestine. Tolls would be moving commerce, and we remember that Jesus met one of his own 12 disciples, Matthew or Levi, sitting at a toll table. So that seems to be a very popular way to make a good amount of money, again, because Israel was situated between Persia and Africa, and much trade went through. And then, of course, we have the temple and the temple tax, and there seems to have been a requirement for paying for this massive building project of Herod. Well, Rome was interested in these three. They were mandatory, and how were they going to exact that? This is where the word telones comes into play. Telones is translated as publican in the Old English, or tax collector in more modern translations. It's how you get money from here to here. These were contracted positions. They were highly irregular, not systematic in how they played out, history shows. And so not only were many tax collectors, again, think of it, they contracted themselves against their own people to get money for Rome. And so they were not just thought to be evil and wicked and materialistic. It seems that the very term telones brought with it this idea that he or she or whoever it was wicked and very money driven. So importantly, in our story, there are numerous times, and you remember this in our life of Jesus, where he ties the word telones, or tax collector, to sinners, harlots, and pagans. Numerous times, tax collectors and sinners almost seems to come off Jesus' tongue naturally. Well, why was this? Well, that's because, most importantly to the story of Israel, to the story of the Bible, This was a person, a telones was someone who voluntarily took themselves out of Israelite society. They actually were purposely violating Torah by doing this in the mind of this culture. And so now we bring ourselves to the story of Zacchaeus. Who is he in the mind of the person looking at him? He would be one who would be considered an outsider, someone who is lost in the story of Jesus and coming to seek and save the lost. It's even worse than a leper, because at least that was involuntary or involuntary. This is someone who every day woke up and said, I want to be, in a sense, categorized outside the covenant of Abraham. Well, let's go to the story. Zacchaeus climbs into a tree so he could see Jesus. That tips us off that something good is about to happen. This is someone who apparently is ready to want to meet Jesus for some reason, some good reason. Jesus calls him by name, saying that he'd like to come to his house. It implies strongly that they knew each other. He had met him before, and that they had talked. The reaction of the crowd to this is exactly what we have here. They said, but when they saw it, they all complained, saying, He, Jesus, has gone to be a guest with a man who is a sinner. Again, what I'd recommend, and the reason I bring it up is because we're understanding sinner as a classification of society, or a religious term that classifies someone here, and we tend to lose that when we get into a book like Romans, and we hear that Jesus, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And then we change the meaning of sinner there usually, and I'm going to recommend we don't. Sinner here is the way sinner will be used by Paul. What Zacchaeus says is interesting. He says, Lord, look, I give half of my goods to the poor, and if I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold. Well, it's my theory that Zacchaeus is doing what Jesus had commanded a person, maybe within Zacchaeus' own hearing, just a chapter before to do, and that is to sell everything he had and give it to the poor. Remember the story of the rich young ruler. So the fact that Zacchaeus is almost mimicking or mirroring the statement that Jesus had commanded to someone else makes me think, I'm reading it this way, that Zacchaeus is wanting to jump down from the tree and saying, I want to do what you just told that other man to do, and he failed to do it. So we often hear then, and this is a fair idea. I understand why. We take the term from Acts 16, what must I do to be saved? And that becomes our evangelical or our Protestant term of choice today. But what I want to do is end the story by, again, listening to Jesus talk and noticing how he gives us a phrase or a turn of phrase that really fits the biblical story to this point. Jesus says this, today salvation has come to your house or his house, because, notice the line now that we would not have expected, but it makes all the sense in the world now, because he is also a son of Abraham. He is a son of Abraham. Again, what I'd recommend, and I don't mean to say this is the wrong word, but the way it's been used in modern lingo, I think misses the point. What we want to catch is that the reason this person is saved, Zacchaeus is considered in the family by this kind of language. That's so important to catch, that he's moving from a person who's outside the Abrahamic covenant to someone who is in fact, he's a family member within the Abrahamic covenant because of his, think through what the story implies, because of his desire to give his life to Yahweh and to Jesus. So again, when we hear Jesus say, I have come to seek and to save the lost, he is taking a person in this story, the Zacchaeus story, from the category of an outsider to admitting that he is actually an insider, simply, again, because of his loyalty.